Thursday, 3 p.m. BST, British summertime. And it really is British summertime. I'm not sure how far I'm going to get through this hour as this temperature is rising and rising in my house and my face is going redder. But we're going to give it a go. We're tuning in from all over the world, representing all over the world. Welcome, everybody. Let's go around the room, find out who we've got today and what we're talking about. Let's start bottom right and move back, and we'll finish with you, Vibhav, to set the scene. Linda, welcome. Where are you?
Hi, Richard. Hi, everyone. So I'm in Italy right now, in Milan, and also here there are 30 degrees, so I'm sweating as well, not just you guys.
And give us a little bit of your professional bio so we know what perspectives you're coming from today.
So I'm a business data analyst, and I'm working in London in Data Reply, that is a consulting company. My expertise is supporting clients in bridging the gap between business and analytics teams and developing value-centric solutions. So my background is in engineering. I'm a management engineer, but after graduation, deep dive in data science and machine learning technologies with, as you know, an eager interest in responsible and ethical AI. And I'm also involved in the AI-powered data automation practice in Reply, where we are analyze and relying on AI-powered platforms and augmented analytics to design new data querying experience that hopefully are more accessible, faster, and simpler. And
brilliant. We're in good company. Odilia, welcome. Where are you? And tell us a little about your professional background.
Hello, everyone. I'm Odilia. I'm also in Italy, in the very south, so warm here today. And I am a PhD candidate at French Space Agency. And my background is both philosophical and engineering one, especially electronics. So since May, I have the honor to serve as a program manager of MKAI on a voluntary base. So I am an AI enthusiast, and I hope I'm looking forward to add some insights to this discussion.
Wonderful. We'll see if we can squeeze in a couple of philosophical questions later on. Niraj, great to see you joining the chat there. Make sure you give us lots of comments. Michael Kanaan, where are you? And let's hear a bit about your professional bio, please.
Thanks, Richard, and it's great to be here with everyone. My name is Mike Kanaan. I'm currently the Director of Operations for the Department of the Air Force, an MIT Artificial Intelligence Accelerator, and previously the co-chair of Artificial Intelligence for the US Air Force. And recently authored a book called T-AI. While I do all those things professionally, I will be speaking in my personal capacity today, and the views that I'll share don't necessarily reflect the views of the US government, the Department of Defense, Department of the Air Force, or any other government agency, but I'm always appreciative to be chatting with you, Richard.
Amazing. Were you a Forbes 30 under 30, Mike, or have I just imagined that?
No, at one point in time. I think I've gotten like a year older since then, at least. but it's one of those, you're always 30 forever. So it's a good thing. We're
hanging
all
on. You know it. You know it, Mike.
Yeah.
Charles, great to see you. You're a little closer to home than me. So where are you? And let's hear a bit about your professional background.
Thanks, Richard. And yeah, I'm in the jungles of Gloucestershire. It's so hot here in England. Today we've become a jungle, so I'm sitting in the garden because it's just simply too hot in my home office. It's a great pleasure to be here. Lovely to meet all the other guests. My focus throughout my career has been on data analytics and more latterly machine learning. But really, in the last sort of 10 years or so, I've really focused on the darker side of tech, I would say, in terms of where it could go wrong, where the risks are. And that's something which has greatly concerned me, and it's taken me all back to my roots, which is where when I studied the law, it was really legal philosophy that I really doubled down on. So I think Vibhav and I might have some few things in common on that regard, and Odilia as well. And so I started a blog in 2016 called Data Philosopher, which is really poking a bit of fun at data science community and really arguing that we need to have more people thinking through the impact of technology on the world. Since then, I headed up technology for Deutsche Bank's Innovation Lab, and also headed up AI at Fidelity, which is a large pensions and investments firm. But since leaving Fidelity, I run a ESG market data company, but focusing specifically on technology governance digital ethics and AI ethics and AI governance keeps us very busy right now. So that's hopefully what we'll get to talk about a bit later on.
I certainly hope so. Outstanding. Vibhav, welcome. Please introduce yourself, and then if you would set the scene for this conversation.
Thank you, Richard, and it's a pleasure to be here with all my fellow panelists. My name is Vibhav. I am an intellectual property rights lawyer based out of New Delhi, India. I practice in the Delhi High Court and the Supreme Court, basically doing patent litigation, copyright litigation, all types of IP litigation. I'm associated with the firm called ANAND and ANAND. In addition to being an IP lawyer with my law and with my background as a lawyer, I am also an AI enthusiast, which means that my goal, I seek to demystify AI in a ways for people who do not understand anything about it, because I think it requires a multidisciplinary perspective. It's that kind of a technology. And to pursue that, I am in three things. I volunteer my time at For Humanity, which is developing AI audits. I volunteer my time at MKAI, and I'm also on the peer review board of a journal called AI and Ethics, which is published by Springer and run by John McIntyre. So that's my overall background, an IP lawyer and an AI enthusiast. It's a real pleasure to be here. And as Richard gave me this opportunity to open up the conversation, thank you for that. I just, from this background, I just wanted to open up the conversation because our topic today is, could artificial intelligence be different? Could it be different from other technology waves? To start off the conversation, I have the most fundamental point, I think, that struck me when we thought about this, is that artificial intelligence, the way the term has been defined itself, the narrative that comes around it automatically makes a difference because of the word intelligence there. We have had significant amount of discussion on what intelligence, and whether the general impression that goes out is that it mimics human intelligence. It could carry out cognitive tasks as humans do, which we understand. If we could delve deeper, that's reference to artificial general intelligence, which is far away. But I think the most fundamental point, if you're looking at a more general perspective, is this fact that the narrative, how AI begins, is at that flaw, and which is why it's important for us to go beyond that. Going further, we also, so it's obviously that's reference is to artificial general intelligence. We need to move beyond that, and what AI is today, what loosely is called weak AI, is where we are analyzing data and patterns, and we basically, the model analyzes large sets of data to identify patterns, which of course I'm quite sure all my panelists are very well aware of. It's meant for the general audience here. And building on that, AI has applications in different areas. Like, it can recognize faces, it can help in search suggestions, it can help, drive cars. There are myriad applications. So my question to the panel, and to open up this conversation, is there something unique about AI that makes it different from the previous technology waves? And in the diverse panel that we have, in their experience, or is just AI a hype? Are we living in some sort of bubble, something that, Richard, you've brought up in the past as well? And then do different applications, the different applications that we have, does that, the fact that AI can be applied in different areas, does that make it different? And third, if it is really different, if we for a second assume AI is different, does that mean that, are we going to be with AI in a net benefit? Is there going to be socially beneficial applications that leads with net benefit? We know there's always pros and cons and everything, but is there going to be net benefit? That's my initial thoughts. Just thought I'll just start the discussion. Thank you, Richard, and I'll just give it to my fellow panelists now.
All right, this is the point where I try and stay quiet now, because those are just brilliant opening questions. I'll say a quick hello to Karen, who's here, saying what a stellar panel. Absolutely. Aruna's here. Aruna will be playing a clip from Aruna later on at the MKAI Inclusive AI Forum. And Roger, great to see you as well. You've really set us up there nicely, Vibhav. Charles, let me come to you first and say, with all this in mind, are we in a filter bubble here? And is there a group of people right now talking about virtual reality, and another group talking about blockchain, another group talking about 5G, who all think that's the most important, risky, opportunistic technology? Are we biased because we spend our day thinking about this, Charles, or is this the right question?
Yeah, great question. I think first I would say, I mean, Vibhav's opening, there's some really big questions in that. which hopefully we get some time to do justice to. But I just want to pick up on the one thing where he said about, can AI have a net benefit to humanity? I think that's the thing that worries me the worst. And yesterday on LinkedIn, I had an exchange with my friend Reed Blackman, who made a very, very articulate comment, which basically said, someone can be a philanthropist and a murderer, but their philanthropy doesn't negate their murderous tendencies. And I think that's something which we need to really think about here. Is a net benefit from AI what we really want? Or is it something where we want to really minimize the harms to society and think through the consequences to society? And that's certainly the position I would be coming from in this debate. To answer Richard's question, is AI overhyped? Yes, but does it have significant impact on our lives and our work in the world? Yes, as well. I think both of these things can be true at the same time. I think that I look at all aspects of digital ethics and technology governance. So I do spend time thinking about VR and, dare I say, blockchain and other aspects. But I think there is a special quality to this topic of AI. And to me, I would just maybe make two things to offer as a kind of sort of definitional starting point to provoke the discussion. If we're talking about AI, I would like to maybe expand that to not just talking about machine learning or fancy maths, as I tend to describe it as, but also to think about robotics and also process automation, which I think collectively have a significant amount of impact in terms of our world of work. And it's today it's process automation that most corporations are experimenting with and implementing. What makes AI different, AI in its most holistic sense, to all other technologies that have come before is really one very simple thing. All technologies we had before, and I think here about the Industrial Revolution and since then, all technologies that came before were really about augmenting human abilities, giving us capabilities that we don't naturally have, the ability to fly, the ability to lift very heavy objects, the ability to travel very quickly, the ability to count and store information that is beyond our natural abilities. So all technology up until now has been about superhuman capabilities. But really, if you look at what the robotics industry or the machine learning industry is really focused on, it's about replicating human abilities in machines. So when we look at things like GPT-3, when we look at process automation in a large corporate, it's about human abilities. And I think it's the consequences of that fundamental difference means that we can't just apply the same tropes that we've used before in terms of how we'll figure it out, we'll de-risk it, it'll be all good in the end. I think we have to think very carefully this time about what it means.
Thank you, Charles, and welcome Antonio and Hazel as well. Mike, can I come to you? And are you happy just to kind of continue with this thought and some of the things that Charles has raised?
I'm happy to, and they're really great points. I think it's important to explain the lens through which I view AI, and each of us do, and like to colloquially think about it more or less, because that characterizes, of course, a lot of this conversation. And then there's a familiarity for anyone listening to know where I'm coming from. Very simply, the way I like to think about AI is as a flashlight, a mirror, and/or a canary in the coal mine. It illuminates otherwise ignored or undiscovered latent patterns memorialized in the world around us, which helps us strategize by asking better questions. And has always been the case and will continue to be, the narrow and specific uses to which we ourselves put our machines will be where the problems arise and the solutions reside. With that said, AI is nothing but a tool, and something that will become more akin to how electricity plays a role in our lives, underpinning nearly everything we do than to anything else. And there are two things I'll address here. First, what makes it different, and then how it plays into AI's inherent duality. We have to worry about how to regulate it and control it the right way and its ultimate purposes. It's a powerful tool, but here's the difference. Historically in our past, powerful tools were in the hands or only accessed by a few to the benefit of many, or to the compromise, detriment, or that could disenfranchise the many. So take a nuke capability, for example, or a weapon. Well, it's pretty tough to go watch the first chain reaction underneath the University of Chicago or steal it from an underground bunker in Tennessee with the fissile material. But here's my point. It's not about the nuke necessarily. It's about the process. We used to let research do its thing, advance the science, chart the unknown, discover new, and that wasn't so much regulated and oversaw. But with this technology, The research and development is available to all at the moment it is in that stage. And all of the technology has an inherent duality to it. So let's talk about an example of that. You know, deep fakes are something we all talk about often. What I'm trying to showcase is this accessibility. So at a technical level, it's quite impressive. And the research community largely drove technologies like that. The research community, by the way, primarily funded and owned by people who sell tech. That's a new thing too. But the underlying techniques made to make a deep fake are pretty advanced, and they've been democratized to all. They're the leading technique and in use to detect, for instance, breast cancer and mammograms, which is great. That's why we science. It's awesome for society. Though we all know that they can create mis and disinformation. So what do we do about that? Or what about the leading team play and strategy algorithms in a subset of reinforcement learning? They're happening like many AI advancements on games, which are literally war games right now. So it's all very cool advancements, and they're important, and we have to allow the science and research to move forward freely with creativity from the best minds in the world, but it's digital, and it's always available. And any of those technologies can be used for good and can be used for bad. So dealing with this in an informed way, a thoughtful one, is what we have to worry about and what makes it different. So the nature of what we do with tech is the same. The character of things has changed.
Thank you, Mike. That was a wonderful opening address as well. I realize now that booking an hour was a mistake and I should have booked about 3 days, but let's see what we can do on this. Welcome David Wood as well, speaker from last month's event, Jazel as well. David has raised an interesting question about comparisons, which I'd like to come to in a moment. Odilia, I think we maybe take a half step back to something Charles said before so we don't lose the opportunity to talk about that as well. So if you want to comment on what Mike said, please do that. But I'd also be interested to hear this kind of net benefit thought that Charles raised, because the way that he described it, that it's not okay to be a murderer just because you're a philanthropist. No, of course not. But the nature of human, of course, is to be some way bad, some way selfish, some way inconsiderate, even if it's unintentional, and of course, in many ways, to be good. So maybe from a philosophical, maybe from a scientist perspective, how do you think about that net benefit of AI?
Sure. So first of all, Mike raised a very important point, and I absolutely agree with him on the fact that AI for me is different because of its invisibility. So the fact that we can have a deep fake, that we cannot recognize if we are chatting with a robot or with a human, this is a unique characteristic of AI. And this is also why we have already AI systems that are make decisions on our behalves. And we are not aware of these, like, for example, just when we open Netflix, the so-called recommendation systems, for example. So this is something that should be urgently addressed, because people should be educated, and debates like the one that we have today should be more and more widespread to let people know when they are interacting with AI or not. Another point that I would like to highlight is the AI is different to other technology waves in the way that we perceive it, because we have this overhype. We are dreaming very big about AI. We are thinking about using AI to solve climate change, to have smart cities, but also we are thinking about use AI to read our thoughts or to detect our dreams and reproduce them. And this is something very unique, because before, these kind of aspects were considered unreachable, and they really impact our intimacy. So this is something that really differentiates AI from other technology. And the third point I would like to highlight is also how AI is changing the way that we give the interpretation of the world, because as from our Aristotelic background, we are used to use causalities rules. Instead, AI is using statistical inferences, And this is also why we need explainability, because since these decisions are made on statistical inferences, it's very hard to understand why and how the decision is making a way or in the other. For example, we have plenty of examples, and I would like just to give one. Maybe you already know, but sometimes we can train an algorithm to recognize a wolf or a dog. But then when we are going to use this algorithm, we discover that we understand that a dog was a dog just because of the background. So if it was snowy, it understood it was a dog. So if we have a dog in a green grass field, it will not recognize that is a dog. So this is something that this is an example just to understand that also calculation is different from intelligence, and AI systems should need always human oversights.
Thank you so much. And I'm loving these opening addresses as well. And Linda, I'll give you that opportunity as well. We've got a LinkedIn user saying he's glad to be here, but unfortunately he or she has got the settings on, means that we don't know who they are. So maybe check your settings and see if we can find out, or give us a shout and say who you are. Comment from Niraj as well. What makes AI different is its open community and strong research background. For sure, that is a factor. Linda, make your address as you wish, but one thing I'd love you to pick up on, if possible, is Odilia said it's statistical inferences. Now, we could argue back and forth on that, but is it a good thing that we call it artificial intelligence because it raises our awareness of the possibility and the risks? Or would life just be a lot easier for all of us if we just called it statistical inferences, and then it would probably just be hidden away from society and far less interesting? The power of linguistics, of course, we know is huge. So welcome. The question, of course, is could AI be different? And if you have any opinions on the terminology, then I would love to hear those as well.
Sure. So yeah, happy to take part of this discussion, because you have already shared so many insights. And yeah, I do believe that AI is different from other technologies. And another bit that I would like to tackle with you is the way how AI is impacting individual autonomy that is different from other technologies. So if you think about the intent, I'm not a law expert, so please step in, jump in if I say something that is not appropriate. But I think that, and I read that the mental state of a decision maker is central and is the key to legal rules. So, however, if an algorithm causes harm to the society, how should the legal system determine who is responsible for that harm? And in the case when the algorithm is learning and is adapting itself according to the different variables that are changing in the process and in the context, how can we be sure that is the developer the one who was intended to cause harm, or is not something that no one has control of? So this is, I think, another important point that should be raised when we talk about why AI is different, because sometimes we might not control it. And I'm totally agree as well with the Odilia new different terms that she used to call AI, because one of my biggest fear, and I also shared this fear with you the last time in our last live, is that society seems to believe that AI is the ground truth, and everything that comes from AI seems to be really the magic that can solve any problem in the world. And this is something really dangerous, because AI is just a mathematical tool that is learning from our data, from our framework, from the frameworks that we are using, and I mean, indeed, if we put garbage in, we will have garbage out, and we need really to be careful about that. And now it's accessible, so many people can access AI, can use AI, can adapt and adopt AI in different contexts. And we really need to be sure that the results coming from these tools can be applied in the society. Otherwise, we will have harming tools that will harm society. So yeah, this is my view.
Thank you.
I really enjoy this point, and I think we've been circulating on a conversation that needs a little bit of practicality, right? So we bring baggage into the word AI. We bring baggage into the conversation about how it's going to affect our lives, and then we bring baggage in. Well, what do we end up doing with it? In a practical sense, you know, how does AI see the world? You know, Richard, if I asked you, behind you have a bunch of books, right? And I said, how do you know those are books? And if you thought about it, right, for maybe 2 minutes and you really sat back, you'd be like, well, you know, after these 30 years of life, I've seen a lot of books. I know what they look like. I know what they do. And hence, yeah, I'm pretty confident that's a book. If you could talk to artificial intelligence, I'm convinced it would tell you the same thing. It would say, well, based on what you've provided me, I'm pretty confident this is the prediction that's going to come, or I think that's a book or a person or whatever it is. Which, when we start unpeeling and unpackaging in that sense, what allows for us to do is to start sitting back and say, well, what can I do today? Well, number one, I can make sure I have representative data of the application or the product of its scope of breach. And then we get to a good conversation about I'm performing due diligence along the way, right? So I don't have an Alexa in my home for here in America only trained on Southern white gentlemen or only people from Northern California. Its scope is too large. It has to be more representative. And then I think you get to this nice little regulatory space or an ability to kind of like frame the conversation and ask you yourself in business and your partners to say, you know, is what we're developing represented by that data set? And while it can't explain anything, at least that gets some practicality to the conversation. And then the last point, we talk in this, you know, really grand narrative. And I think that we have to inspire more people to see the world through the lens of AI and bring it into their daily lives. Because when we're talking about AI at scale, we're talking about two things it does in the world right now: ads and high frequency trading. That's it, right? At any reasonable scale. So the more we talk about it, the more we simplify this discussion, I think we can bring it back down to earth, create smarter opportunities, do smarter in the future. And then there's a nice narrative here, and everyone can start saying, well, how would I use AI in my life?
Thank you. Vibhav, continuing Mike's thoughts there, and something you said a little while ago as well, which I think is true of AI and true of social media, that the speed of deployment means that we test in the wild and we test on people at scale. That is different, isn't it? Probably to previous technology waves, would you say?
That's absolutely correct. I think there are a couple of points that both Mike and Linda made, which are important. So, like Mike mentioned about making it a simplified conversation. So I just wanted to break this down even further. For everyone who wants, AI will start with your data. And it's the data set that will determine how the AI model works. And Mike already brought the point that it's representative. The data set is, the better it is. So that's one point of a difference that we must know. Like, if I am training a model on a data to make a particular prediction, then AI has that impact in the sense that it would either perpetuate an existing information in a data set on which it was trained, or in other words, perpetuate the bias, maybe if there's a biased data set, or it gives you the opportunity to in a positive way, if you're an optimist, to redraw the narrative, to rewrite the narrative. If you're making an AI model with a particular application, like Mike mentioned about making applications, and it's a tool, like AI is a tool, and it's a tool to achieve something, then if you are making a representative data set, you have the chance to correct something. That's one way of looking at AI being different from other technologies. And coming back to your question, Richard, I think that is also important, because the fundamental point is data. There has been a phase of development which has allowed for that data to be freely available and to train AI models. So from that perspective, about how it was made is probably a factor, in my view at least, that makes it different, and why we are now having these conversations, why we are thinking from an ethical standpoint, as Charles is doing, or from a philosophical standpoint as Odilia, and why we're having this conversation. So I think these are very interesting points that have come up in the discussion. And just to finish, and because the law point came in, is that I think Linda also brought up very important points. And I think these are open questions. There are ways of probably giving AI personhood. There's a possibility of creating proactive compliance with AI through audits. The final point that I want to bring in from the regulatory standpoint, what Mike said, Linda said, Odilia said, and what we've discussed, is that the trust factor for AI, for whatever reason we might think it is different, let's call different as something not understood properly. The trust factor in AI, I think at least, will probably be at a higher threshold, because we'll actually have to set up mechanisms to build that trust. It's not like a computer that I bought you a computer, I showed you what it does, I opened up Windows and I showed that your life became easy. It's a little bit, it's probably a step further that we have to go.
Charles, if I may come to you, Vibhav's talking about data, and according to some of the stats, ITC, I think, presented some recently, will have something like trebled the amount of data being produced between 2020 and 2025. And part of that is all the connected devices, the wearables, the smart speakers that Mike mentioned, Alexa earlier on. I read a stat, it'll be something like 175 zettabytes of data being produced. A zettabyte is 1 trillion gigabytes, is it? It's just insane numbers. So that means that companies have got access to incredible streams of data, and there the role of AI becomes to start making decisions on that data. You talk about autonomous decision making or autonomous organizations. We talk about DAOs a lot, don't we, in that? Is this one of the big dangers of AI? Perhaps something that does set it apart is that we're going to have to rely on autonomous decision making beyond 2025, or perhaps even now, you consider?
So I guess maybe it would be helpful if I take the kind of more provocative position on this, because I think it's very important to separate the kind of our awe of the technology and what we're able to do with the technology from a kind of real grounded view in terms of the risks of doing so. And I think the risks of machine learning are multi-headed. And when I think about the data volumes, like you're doing there, I mean, that's one aspect, but the other aspect is really in terms of the computational requirements that those data volumes then have. So if let's take GPT-3, I was fortunate enough to have an audience with Sam Altman a few months back, and we were exchanging a few emails about some of the sort of limit points of where we're heading with some of these things. But I mean, GPT-3 has, I think, a couple of 100 billion parameters which are needed in order for it to do its thing, which is essentially deep fake human language. And that's really awesome in terms of the technical capability, but it has limitations. I mean, if you try and get GPT-3 to actually create something more than a football or sports result, it becomes gibberish pretty quickly. And so the next level of GPT-3, what's beyond GPT-3, is going to require, trillions of parameters, and the computational resources that requires are really quite staggering to comprehend. And I guess this is the counter argument to what Michael was saying, is that yes, the baseline mathematics that you need to grasp in order to be able to use machine learning is quite democratized, and thanks to people like Andrew Ng and others, the skills are freely available. But the resources required in order to really to do anything significant with machine learning are starting to come out of bounds to a lot of researchers and to certainly most ordinary people. And I think one concern I have is that who is making the decisions in terms of which projects get funded, get that computational resources, and are those really the smartest things for us to do? And a specific example on that, I went to CogX, like I'm sure many others who are joining this call have been to, and I was quite blown away by the enthusiasm and the technology, and I definitely recognize the triumph of technology and what we're able to do. But I do get concerned when I see yet another toy demo of a machine that's able to recognize human faces or, you know, do something fairly trivial. And when you challenge the team behind it, you know, what is the computational requirement of this project? And, or put a different way, what is the CO2 impact of this project? Then they very quickly disengage from the conversation. And I think we have to think very holistically about machine learning. Is this just an exercise of hubris? Or is this really making impactful difference to our lives in a positive way?
Charles, staying with you for one more moment, that enthusiasm that you saw at CogX put you on the spot here a little bit. If I had to push you for what kind of enthusiasm you would describe that as, would you think of it like a child opening a Christmas present on Christmas Day? Is it the enthusiasm of a corporate exec who can see more revenues and profit? Or is it this a more holistic sense of the betterment of humankind and nature and so on?
I think the danger is that a lot of us have a very limited dimension in terms of how we look at these things. So if we're just focused on the technical breakthroughs, I mean, there's a lot of people who are really quite blown away by the capabilities of let's stay with GPT-3. I mean, that itself is quite amazing technology. And as the ramifications of it are very interesting to consider, but there's many more facets to that, and I think that's the challenge. And I think the danger with I think the blockchain cryptocurrency community is way more dogmatic than the AI community. I think there's some proper lunatics in that world, but in our world, in the machine learning space, I do think we're often in danger of just celebrating the technical capabilities and not thinking through the wider impact. And I think one thing we've definitely seen, Elon, for better or for worse, he's definitely thrown a spotlight on the crypto world and its impact on the environment. I don't think it's going to be very long before that spotlight shifts onto us in the AI community as well, and I think we need to be ready for that.
Yes, I think a decent-sized deep learning model can use more power than an entire country sometimes, so I can't disagree. Mike, I know you want to touch on sustainability. Do you want to do a quick bit now, or should I come back to you in a moment?
Yeah, just very briefly, because I think this is a topic that is just starting to, people are becoming sophisticated enough in the conversation to finally have it, that we got to talk about, is that AI product that you made or the thing you're taking your time to do with it beneficial in such a sense that you're also burning down the planet right now for essentially a toy, right? I mean, that's what we're talking about here. And to me, personally, there is no legitimate usage of mimicking humans with deepfakes. There's no legitimate usage, right? So I think that we have to have tough conversations about that. And then also we need to separate conversations. So the automation and AI conversation, they're used interchangeably in everyday speak, but these are not interchangeable words. And I think as leaders of the AI community or at your organizations that you work at, we have to be really precise and thoughtful for our language. And simply, not all AI is automation. Not all automation is AI. Automation sometimes uses AI, and AI sometimes results in automation. So as AI informs and drives automation more, we're going to move from these simple rules-based systems to integrating learning technologies that might result in automating an action. So those discussions have to be had, real discussions today to inform tomorrow. But when you separate that out, you start to find these scenarios where maybe getting beyond rules-based things is good, right? Because we can be more informed or have more inputs into the system before it makes some detrimental choice. I think that's a good thing. But the sustainability conversation, double, triple down, green AI is a new future. It's a project we actually lead here where, learning how to drive down compute resources and compilers and code on legacy platforms so that you're running your models with less parameters, but still getting the same output. This is a huge market right now.
Mike, thank you for that. And it's easy to point the finger. I mean, you could point it at people who race trucks and say that's not a good use of CO2. You could talk about football fans traveling all around Europe for some super league that we want to create. You could talk about cement. 11% of all CO2 is produced by pouring cement every year. And of course, now we talk cryptocurrencies and AI. Linda, come to you about this point. AI must be getting more efficient, I'm assuming. Companies like yours don't want to waste time or resources or data, do they, with your clients? Are we seeing more effective, efficient AI in your opinion? I think we might need to hear your voice, Linda.
Sorry, yes, no, yeah. And so definitely what we are seeing is that more and more companies are using data and analytics at the center of decision making. And it is definitely a huge phenomenon that we are seeing. I don't want to say day by day, but definitely it's what companies are trying to do. And it is the best way that they can do. Something that I'm afraid is that there are still huge challenges and a lot of problems, daily problems that companies and developers team have to deal with daily. And one of the biggest one that I can see that scares me is that is the confirmation bias, for instance. So when using data, we find something that supports what we believe. Instead of asking new question, finding new answer, we just stop diving in that and assuming that what we found it's good. And this has really big impact on the final quality of the outcome. And this is something that we should care about when we build data science team and AI teams in a company. And context is the key. I think it's important to have the right analytic method, and I will come back to the regulatory topic that I mentioned before. But I do believe also that we should learn from the past, but we should not be defined by that. So we should learn from the past how a phenomenon can be managed, can be looked at. But we also be aware that the future, the present is continuously changing, and the way we deal with data, the way we deal with AI should change as well. And about regulatory frameworks, I have another provocative question for Vibhav, and I hope that you can take that. And I'm talking as a developer, and recently talking about frameworks and rules. A couple of months ago, the European Commission proposed new rules and actions for the excellence and trust in artificial intelligence. The aim of this new piece of work has been guaranteeing the safety and the fundamental rights of people and businesses, increasing the adoption, the strength, and the innovation across Europe. I do believe that this is important and fundamental for us. So for people who work daily in AI and who try to create every day better products within this field. But at the same time, what I see is that policymakers are providing us principles, and as developers, we need to interpret principles and to incorporate those principles in our design processes. So now, I need to move from my code task to the interpretation task, and really to try to put this piece within the product I'm building. And so my question is, I can see on one side lawmakers, and I can see on the other side code genius, probably. Who or what can be in the middle to bridge this gap?
So I think that's a very, very important question, Linda. I think the answer there lies in the fact that it has to be a joint team. I understood when lawyers, regulators are making the law, or when the EU regulations are coming up with a risk assessment mechanism, or they've identified which is areas where you can't use AI, areas where you could use AI, where AI is prohibited. So the point I'm trying to make here is that lawyers need to take inputs from developers, and when the legal regulations come into place, it has to be in a joint effort, because the points that you're raising are important, because that is one way of regulating AI through the EU regulations. There are other and that's one approach that has been taken. And so it's a little tricky to answer. This is a gray area, because what happens is I think it'll always come down to, at least in my view, I think would be that till the point we have a significant amount of human involvement in the AI process, and AI itself has not become autonomous in the sense that you can distinguish what the AI is doing from the human input, then we would at that point of time probably be moving more towards existing laws to address that. But the minute AI, and this touches on a very important point about AI and law and why AI is different from other technologies, is that the minute AI becomes in this self-learning ability, it's been trained on a data multiple amount of times, and it's something that even comes up in intellectual property, that if it's supposing if you've trained it multiple amount of times and it's creating something creative in the copyright space, some music or something, and you can't distinguish whether that was because the data it was fed or it is because of its self-learning ability. So that's a gray area. We don't have an answer to that yet. But to address your question, I think at this starting point, it would be more on the lines of risk assessment, possibly. And to address that gap, what would require is that it has to be collaborative. In the context of human oversight. I mean, I'm addressing this question only as on narrow AI, human oversight, human involvement in AI clear. Beyond that, it's still gray. I hope that addresses some part of your query. I think it's a collaborative thing. Both sides, I don't think law can be made without input from developers. And I don't think that when regulations are in place or when anticipated regulations are coming in place, developers can design something and put something there without discussing it with the legal team. That's an ideal perspective. I don't know how that practically works, but it would be good to hear your thoughts of how you would see this perspective.
Linda, what do you think to Vibhav's response? And I see David Woods mentioned about incentives as well. What did you think to that?
Yeah, I mean, ideally, I'm going to be critical about that. It's a great idea. Again, as a developer, I'm really eager on these topics, and that's what pushed me to deep dive in the law field as well, because I really want to understand what can I do as a developer and as a person whose products will impact people, because that's the point. I'm aware that what I'm going to build will impact fundamentally people's life. So I want to be sure that I can be compliant with law, and I can build something that will not be harmful. On the other side, I also think that providing incentives to people to become expert in the legal regulatory can be hard, because we live in a world where the expertise really goes sector by sector, and it can be hard finding someone that can be expert in multiple sectors. And while I do believe we need to boost and push for diverse teams and collaborative teams, that is something that I don't see right now in companies and in the data science team that I've worked with, because they tend really to be strict and separate to each other.
Thank you. Let's hear a little bit more from Odilia. Odilia, do you want to comment on that, or should I ask you a different question? What would you like?
Yes, sure. I fully agree with Linda about the need of an interdisciplinary team to bridge this gap between the regulation and the legal part, the legal framework, and people that are very technical and code. So this is an important point. But also for me, what is important is really to highlight who is responsible for these algorithms. For example, if we are using an AI system to detect, for example, skin cancer, and finally this decision will be wrong. So who is responsible for this? Is the developer of the code? Is the medical staff that decides to use that algorithm? So it's very complicated, the intricate situation. And what I really think we need to clarify is the accountability of AI tools. And also, this is go hands by hand with, of course, explainability and trust. Because if we don't have explainability, we cannot have trust. And also, all the accountability finally rise from these two factors. So I have this view.
Do you feel that at the heart of this conversation, Odilia, is that we've identified a powerful technology, maybe unique, maybe in some ways, but are we identifying that we've got a trust problem, perhaps trust between businesses, government, and consumers?
Sure.
Is that some of the bridges that need to be built as well, do you think?
Sure. I think that trust should be put at the center of this ecosystem, because otherwise, all the different actors cannot understand each other, cannot trust each other. So I really think that finally this is the key factor that should be clarified. I know that it's very difficult. It's easier to say to be said that to put it in reality, but. I really would like to highlight the lack of framework, the lack of regulations that could help to bridge today this gap.
Charles, Odilia brings up some pretty crucial points there. One of the challenges, I guess, is context as well, isn't it?
Yeah. And I'm just looking at the comments on online. Unfortunately, I couldn't find the box to respond. I'd like to, but I might have to do that after the session.
Which one were you going to respond to?
Well, I also want to engage with David, but that would be just. I could spend a lifetime in dialogue with David. I find his perspectives so interesting. So thank you, David, for your contribution always, and everyone else's. So I think to Linda and Odilia's points about having different viewpoints, perspectives, context, and a sort of multidisciplinary approach. And I think that is something I very, very much find is a concept that hits home very strongly. I mean, I trained as a lawyer, but I was always a geek as a kid, and I spent my entire career in technology. But I've been the one in the technology community who isn't from a technology background. So I always kind of not really fitted into that world either. But I think now I play this kind of different role where I look at the ethics of tech and the social impact of tech. I found my niche, but for me it's very clear when engineers are in their thread, or when social scientists are in their thread. And I think we do need to bring multiple groups, and that's one of the things that we look at very strongly is when we're rating companies, we look at the extent to which they've been successful in engaging with stakeholders, and as diverse a group of stakeholders, by which I mean, stakeholders are not just customers, but also the wider community. And I'll give you an example. If we take WhatsApp, if WhatsApp engages with customers and only gets stakeholder feedback from their customers, they're actually missing a very, very important stakeholder group, which is non-WhatsApp users. And the reason that's important is because a lot of people who are not on WhatsApp are not on WhatsApp through choice, because of design choices that WhatsApp have made. And actually, it's very difficult, and believe me, I'm one of those people. It's very difficult to be living a fulfilled, functional life in 2021 and not be on WhatsApp. And so what we look at is the extent to which an organization is engaged with a wide selection of stakeholder groups, and then the extent to which they've taken that feedback on board into their process. And for me personally, I think that's one of the most key aspects of what ethics is about. Ethics is all about that dialogue. It's the activity, it's the interaction with stakeholders, and it's not just about the you're wrong and I'm right argument. It's about trying to listen to the other, incorporate their point of view, And I think to Linda's earlier point about principles to kind of guidance for engineers in the field, I mean, I think that's also a very, very key part of this. You know, the exercise of coming up with principles is, you know, every organization seems to have done this. You know, 7 post-it notes containing the least offensive words we can all agree on. It's an absolutely meaningless exercise. What we need to do instead is find a way of harvesting stakeholder feedback, channeling that into a process where then developers or marketeers or salespeople, whoever's on the front line with machine learning, gets actionable decisions in terms of what guidance they should have in the field. And that should be a continuous process. And that's one of the things we look at.
Charles, stay with you for just one more moment, then Mike, I'll come to you, and I'd like you to just talk a little about ESG as well before we wrap up in the next few minutes, if we can, about that net good again. Charles, it strikes me as, I use the phrase weird, the word weird from time to time in this domain, which seems to be sometimes the best word. One that seems weird to me is that we have these incredible social networks, as in social media companies, designed by people that, if I'm being repugnant, seem to prefer spending their time by themselves in their own rooms than they do being social. And now we have emotion recognizing ML not being designed by nurses or carers or teachers, but again, being designed by people who seem to think there's about 6 emotions in total from the human face. And David said, sorry, not David, Paul Levy said, do we need deliberately naive people? Do you see a role for that more in this in the future?
Yeah, I think I think your point about social media being designed by sociopaths, certainly that's true of one social media platform I can think of. I think I think that's a marketing thing. I mean, social media is antisocial by definition. I mean, socializing is something which is really something which we can only do when it's not mediated by technology. And so social media is at best a very, very poor relation to our true social life, which we've all been so badly deprived of over the last 12 months. So I think we've got to be very careful with naming things. Yeah, coming to ESG, so I mean, I think what's great is I mean, for me, the penny drop moment, which happened probably 2 or 3 years ago, you know, I've been writing and talking about this stuff and in despair that, you know, I can shout louder and write more angry words, but I can't really have any impact in terms of the way that things are going. And then I realized that actually the work that we're doing is you know, we're not the first people in human history to be facing these challenges. And if I think back to you know, things like the Silent Spring in the early 60s, which was the sort of the first calling card towards environmental sustainability, you know, that was written off and as you know, activist fringe hippie nonsense. And now it's looked on as the kind of the key to, you know, our sustainability movement, the kind of key canary in the mine voice. And I think what's happened in the sustainability field is that we've now got a very strong industry of ESG professionals who look at the non-financial impact that organizations have and provide that data in a meaningful way to investors who can then discern between, you know, company X or company Y. And you know, that's having a huge impact. And you know, you only have to look at a company corporate website to see that ESG is the absolute trend of the day. And I think if we can incorporate these questions of technology ethics, technology governance into the ESG conversation, then I think we can start to nudge some of the large tech companies towards better outcomes, and also encourage startups and investors in startups to not just pursue those goals which have the greatest financial reward, but those goals which have the greatest impact on all of us.
Thank you. Mike, a couple of minutes on the clock with you, if I would, on ESG.
Sure. So I think the big takeaways, there are 3 big takeaways. You know, you hear AI people talk about data all the time. Let me tell you why it matters and why AI is different. Data writes the software. That's it. That's why you actually care about data. And a computer does not know what it does not see. And that's why it's so crucial. So in closing, you know, from how I think about this often, what I think we all need to think about, it's 2021. The digital divide still separates our youth from education and our urban and rural communities from opportunity. Technologies like these are infringing on human rights across the globe, yet our society doesn't discuss it, at least to the extent we're generally aware of the conflicts and potential compromises we face. And we can all influence the path and provide opportunity for others, like our kids, our friends, and our neighbors. And mark these words, the future rock stars in tech, they're going to be teachers, geologists, dancers, artists, psychologists, parents, and many more. So the takeaway is to address the questions that have been brought up here is, what are you doing to better understand and help others do the same in ways that matter to them? Do you love dance? Help someone dance with a robot. Are you a writer? Show them a language transformer. Are you a psychologist? Help us deal with how people handle life changes driven by tech. Are you a wildlife or nature preservationist? Let's use computer vision to track lions across the savannah and grasslands. And if you're a political representative, help us bridge the digital divide and present the technology to more people, because a computer doesn't know what it doesn't see. And the point is, AI is for everyone, and we all have to be a part of that cause in changing the current tide.
Mike, that's beautiful. And what a wonderful way to close. I'm going to do two things. One, I'm going to show this, one of my favorite books, and you'll see the amazing author of this book. Just buy it. You know, and if you can't afford it, I'll buy it for you. Just write to me and I will send you a copy of Mike's book if you don't have the money to buy that. Honestly, just get it, read it. It's fantastic. I'll also just mention a note of thanks for everybody who's been contributing on the comments today. I see David's been quite vocal of late. That's very, very helpful to these discussions. We do this once a month. This is pretty much the highlight of my month. These moments like this, they're truly, truly special. And we'll be talking about, will we ever get the bias out of AI? So this time next month, we'll be doing that with another special panel. Vibhav, we've just gone past the hour, but can you take us home today with a bit of a summary?
Yeah, so thanks for that. I'll just quickly picking up the points if you've missed this conversation and picking 10 points from the conversation that we've discussed. AI is about augmenting ability. It's about statistical inference. AI is invisible. AI is merely a tool. AI, we need clarity from a developer standpoint from the legal framework. There is a possibility of AI having an impact on civil liberties. Machine learning has to be holistic, and trust is an important factor in AI. We need a multidisciplinary perspective. And to wrap it up with the last point that Mike said, which gave me an insight, is that it's also important to ask the right questions.
Very, very good. We're going to close now. Anybody would like to have the final word? Any last sentence that you want to get in before we close this session?
I did my book order yesterday. I'm waiting for the autograph.
Michael, sell it to you as an
I
NFT.
would be happy to take a trip out there from here in Cambridge, Massachusetts.
Thank you,
I'm
Mike.
into it. Thank you, guys. Yeah.
Mike is threatening to come to London next month, so we shall see. Thank you so very much, Vibhav. Thank you for summarizing at the end. Charles, Mike, Odilia, Linda, and everybody who's joined this discussion on YouTube and on LinkedIn. Thank you so very much. These conversations are important. They do ripple out into business and society, I promise you, and help us all just see a little further and a little clearer about how we get the future that we need and that we want. Thank you so very much, everybody. See you soon.